His party is not ready for the elections. The country is not ready for elections. And so I think it was a very, very poorly thought out move and was not consulted at all. It's been downhill for the UK ever since that Brexit vote 8 years ago. But unfortunately, it's been 2 years where there's been a huge amount of disappointment. Anti-international students, including those from India, Indian students overtook China as the highest number of international students, and I was very disappointed. They see India as a top priority. Labour launched Labour Friends of India as an initiative. To my memory, before Conservatives launched Conservative Friends of India.
Hi, this is Sukanya Saha and you're watching Hindustan Times. Our today's guest is very special. He's Lord Karan Bilimoria, a distinguished British-Indian entrepreneur and a crossbench member of the House of Lords. He's the founder of Cobra Beer and a passionate advocate for UK-India relations, playing a key role in fostering economic and cultural ties between the two nations. His contributions to business, education and public service have earned him numerous accolades and solidified his reputation as a prominent and influential figure in both the UK and India. Hi Karan, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you.
So now, according to several experts, Britain's opposition Labour Party could be on the path to the biggest election victory in its history, with a recent poll predicting a thumping 194-seat majority. The poll, which looked at voting estimates across all UK constituencies, predicted that Labour could win 422 out of 650 seats in the July 4th election. However, the Conservatives under Rishi Sunak were predicted to win 140 seats by the poll. So Karan, what are your thoughts on Rishi Sunak's decision to call on general election on July 4th, especially considering the Conservative Party's current standing in the polls?
We were all taken completely by surprise when the election was called early. The general consensus was the election was going to be in the autumn, either before the American elections or after the American elections. And when it was called early, it took everyone, including, I believe, his own cabinet by surprise, let alone the whole country by surprise. It was not expected, and I don't think it was a good decision at all. His party is not ready for the elections. The country is not ready for elections. And so I think it was a very, very poorly thought out move and was not consulted at all.
Right. So almost all opinion polls suggest a Labour victory in upcoming elections. Do you believe these predictions will hold true on election day? After 14 years of Conservative rule, what do you think are the main reasons behind the party's current struggle in the polls?
A week is a long time in politics, and we've still got 5 weeks to go until the elections on the 4th of July. However, the facts are there that the Conservatives are trailing consistently by up to 25% in the polls. And what we've got now is a situation of, one, there's anti-incumbency. They've been in power now for 14 years. But the biggest reason for this goes back to 2016, to June the 23rd, when the Brexit referendum took place. And quite frankly, it's been downhill for the UK ever since that Brexit vote 8 years ago. We've had 5 prime ministers. We've had complete instability, and now the country is realizing that Brexit was a very, very bad move and an act of great self-harm by our country, where we have not benefited from it whatsoever. And it's been one thing after another, and of course, we had the pandemic, and then we had the Ukraine war, which is still carrying on, and the energy crisis and inflation in this country that peaked to 11%. So when Rishi Sunak saw that the economy, which was in recession at the end of last year, going to a small growth in the first quarter of this year, 0.6%, small growth, and inflation, which had been at 11% 18 months ago, dropped to 2.3%, which is very close to the 2% which we wanted to be at. He thought, well, I've got some good news economically, let me go to the polls. But the reality is, people are quite frankly fed up, and the Conservative Party has been fighting amongst themselves. You've got the right wing of the party that has been driving everything, and moves like sending asylum seekers to Rwanda. I mean, most people in the country think this is not a good idea at all. It's an inhuman thing to do. No one wants the illegal boats to come across the channel, but this is not the way to deal with it. It's not working in a practical way. It's breaking international treaty and international law. It's costing hundreds of millions of pounds. And we've had one asylum seeker who's been put on a plane who they paid £3,000 to go, and he went voluntarily. So, you've got a government that has lost all credibility. They put taxes up to the highest level in over 70 years. This is not the way for a conservative government, which is known to put taxes down. They've been putting taxes up. So people are not happy at all. They've had a cost of living crisis. They're not as well off as they were. And there's anti-incumbency. And if you look at the polls, people are saying, we'll vote for Labour because we don't want to vote for the Conservatives.
So how would you evaluate Rishi Sunak's tenure as a Prime Minister? What have been his key successes and failures according to you? Also, as an Indian origin Prime Minister, as the first Indian origin Prime Minister of the UK, how significant do you think Sunak's leadership is to British Indian voters?
Well, when I was awarded Asian of the Year in 2002 by the Home Secretary at the time, David Blunkett, in my acceptance speech, I said that in my lifetime, we would see an Asian as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. It took 20 years, and Rishi Sunak was appointed Prime Minister. It was a matter of huge celebration and rejoicement for all Asians and Indians in particular, and for me. And I've known Rishi since before he joined Parliament because I know his father-in-law, Narayan Murthy, very well. And I like him. He's a wonderful human being. He's very bright. He's very capable. And we had great hopes. But unfortunately, it's been 2 years where there's been a huge amount of disappointment. And with the UK-India relations, we were hoping that a free trade agreement would be signed. Boris Johnson talked about Diwali, I can't remember, it was 2 years ago, that it'd be completed by, but we've had 2 Diwalis and the free trade agreement still hasn't been signed. We haven't had a major prime ministerial delegation in the way we used to with Tony Blair, with Gordon Brown, with David Cameron, even with Theresa May, where we take business leaders, academic leaders, the press, cabinet ministers to India. We haven't done that since 2016. And with an Indian prime minister, what an opportunity to take a big delegation to India. That hasn't happened. So there's been a huge amount of disappointment, and taxes continually going up. Corporation tax, which was at 19%, was put up to 25%. And when I was the first ethnic minority president of the Confederation of British Industry, the CBI, the equivalent of the CII in India, and Rishi Sunak was Chancellor, I kept saying to him, don't put up taxes. Unfortunately, he didn't listen and just kept putting up taxes to the highest level in 70 years, including putting up corporation tax from 19% to 25%. I think these are hugely damaging moves. And everyone in the country is paying more tax. The income tax thresholds have been frozen. And what has upset me a great deal when it comes to India is the attitude of this government to international students and to immigration. They've been anti-immigration, quite frankly, anti-universities. And our UK universities are the best in the world along with America. 4 out of the top 10 universities in the world are British universities, including the University of Cambridge, where I'm speaking to you from. 17 out of the top 100 in the world are British universities, including the University of Birmingham, where I'm proud to be Chancellor. And yet you have a government that takes our universities for granted. And international students, the government is an anti-international student. They've taken away the right for international students to bring dependents. And that is really damaging. The top MBA courses, like the ones here at Cambridge or at London Business School or the Oxford Saïd Business School, 25% of the MBA students bring dependents with them. They're not going to come. And then the worst thing was the 2-year post-graduation work visa, the graduate visa, which is something I helped to introduce in 2007, was brought in 2008, taken away in 2012, brought back in 2021. And there was Rishi Sunak and his advisors and many of his members of his party wanting to remove the 2-year post-graduation work visa. And I've just led a Birmingham University delegation to India. Everyone was worried about it. Prospective students were worried about it. The number of deposits were down 60% since January, and that would be decimating for many universities in the UK. But they didn't listen. Eventually, they did listen because the Migration Advisory Committee said, please keep the graduate route as it is. Even then, they wanted to ignore that advice. And then with a lot of pressure from a lot of us, including from the Education Minister herself, Rishi Sunak backed down. So this is not what I expected from an Indian origin Prime Minister, to be anti-international students, including those from India, Indian students overtook China as the highest number of international students. And I was very disappointed.
So, Karan, what impact do you foresee a Labour victory having on the UK's political and economic landscape? With two new governments soon to be in place in both India and the UK, how do you think it will work out if Labour comes to power?
The Labour governments that I have worked with, whether it's Tony Blair as Prime Minister or Gordon Brown as Prime Minister, were very, very friendly towards India. I've been on delegations, Prime Minister delegations, with both of them. I've been with Gordon Brown when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer to India. They see India as a top priority. Labour launched Labour Friends of India as an initiative. To my memory, before Conservatives launched Conservative Friends of India. So the Labour Party have been very friendly towards India since I've known. And in terms of business, the most business-friendly government that I've known in my career, having launched Cobra Beer from scratch over 3 decades ago, is the Tony Blair, Gordon Brown Labour government. They had low rates of capital gains tax. They had entrepreneur relief of £10 million to encourage entrepreneurship and startups. They had many good business initiatives and low rates of tax. They had a top rate of tax of 40% until the last, right at the end of their tenure. So, they were very business friendly. In terms of immigration, the Labour Party has always had a more, whereas the Conservative government at the moment has had a hostile approach to immigration, the Labour Party has always had a more, much, I think, a better approach to immigration. And when it comes to international students, the 2-year post-graduation work visa, which I helped to institute, was when there was a Labour government. In 2008, it was brought in. It was taken away by a Conservative government, Theresa May, Home Secretary, in 2012. It was only brought back in 9 years later, in 2021, by Boris Johnson, after a lot of pressure from people like me. I'm the co-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on International Students. I'm the president of the UK Council for International Student Affairs. We put a lot of effort. NISAO, the organization that helps Indian students and Indian alumni, all of us worked to get that 2-year post-graduation work visa back. And now, just recently, there's a threat to take it away. Now, I don't think a Labour government will take that away. They will keep it. I think a Labour government will be more sensible when it comes to immigration. We've got labour shortages in just about every sector. But because of the anti-immigration attitude of this Conservative government, there's a shortage of labour. They put the minimum threshold to over £35,000. That makes it unaffordable to bring in anyone, most people from abroad. It used to be £25,000, £26,000.
So, Sunak argues that his plan is delivering an economic recovery. Do you see evidence of the recovery? And how convincing do you find his promises of more tax cuts?
Well, the promises of tax cuts, yes, they reduced national insurance twice by 2p.
Yeah.
But it's had no effect whatsoever because the main problem is the taxes overall have gone up to the highest level in 70 years. And the income tax threshold has been frozen and will be frozen going forward. So that means it doesn't go up with inflation. And that is a stealth tax where people get taxed more because your thresholds when you start paying tax are frozen. More and more people are being brought into higher rates of tax. So people are paying more tax. Companies are paying more tax because the corporation tax has gone from 19% to 25%. So I can't see how they're saying they talk about reducing taxes, but what they've actually been doing is increasing taxes. And increasing taxes is not good for anyone. It's not good for inward investment. It's not good for business. It's not good for growth. It's not good for creating employment. So the Labour Party is giving assurances that it's not going to increase taxes. They are going to increase one tax where they said they're going to do it regardless, is to put VAT on private school fees, which I think is a very wrong move to make because only 7% of the children in this country go to private schools, 93% go to state schools. And if you start making it unaffordable for children to go to private schools, then they will go to state schools, which puts more of a burden on state schools. So I think that plan will backfire. But they have assured business and industry that they will not put up taxes, they will not put up income tax, they will not put up capital gains tax, they will not put up corporation tax. They've given us those assurances.
So, Labour has pledged to forge closer ties with Europe. How feasible and beneficial do you think he will be for the UK post-Brexit?
Well, Brexit has been the most damaging act of self-harm any country can do to itself. And nowadays, in any speech that I give, I ask people how many of you think it was a mistake. 99% of the hands go up, whoever the audience is. So nobody at this stage in this election, they're too scared to talk about Europe and Brexit. Because where the Labour Party are concerned, they're trying to get back those red wall seats many of those seats that they lost in the 2019 election. They're trying to recover those seats. Once Labour in power, if they're in with a big majority, I can see immediately there will be moves to get closer to Europe. For a start, we could move towards a Norway-type model, an EEA or EFTA model, where the United Kingdom rejoins the single market and the customs union. We have free movement of people, goods, capital and services. Maybe joining the European Parliament again and joining the EU is a step away, but the first step can definitely be to be a Norway-type model, EFTA, EEA-type model, which would be, business will rejoice. Because at the moment, we've got extra costs thanks to Brexit, extra bureaucracy, extra red tape, movement of people. We all have, we have to stop. It's painful when we travel to Europe now, and I cry when my passport is stamped when I go into a European country, when earlier we could move freely as you would between states and India.
So as someone deeply involved in UK-India relations, what changes do you anticipate in the bilateral ties if Labour wins the election? How can the UK and India strengthen their economic partnerships in the coming years, you think?
I think that what we need is a time of stability. What we've had in the last 8 years since Brexit is constant instability. As I said, 5 prime ministers. It is just not the environment that is conducive to inward investment. It's the uncertainty that brings. So we need some certainty now. We need a period of stability. And if you get a Labour government with a large majority, they will then be in a position where consumers and the public will have a sense of stability, where countries dealing with us will have a sense of stability, including India. And I'm hoping that the potential for UK-India is huge. Our trade is now reaching almost 40 billion pounds a year. That is still scratching the surface. We do almost 100 billion pounds of trade with China. India should be the #1 partner for the UK. The United States has always been a special relation for the UK. It's our biggest trading partner. The European Union as a group is by far our biggest trading partner, with 45% of our trade. India is only our 12th largest trading partner. We should be doing much more with India in trade, business, investment. And I do hope that the Labour government will get behind the UK-India relationship. And for a start, I hope the first thing that Keir Starmer does is to show that and demonstrate that by taking a large delegation to India to show that we mean business.
So with the snap election now scheduled, how do you see this affecting the ongoing UK-India FTA negotiations that began in January 2022? What are the potential short-term and long-term impacts, you think?
Absolutely. Of course, if we rejoin the EU customs union, then it will be the EU free trade agreement that is also, I believe, very close to being negotiated between EU and India, side by side with the UK-India FTA. I've been very involved in FTAs when I was president of the Confederation of British Industry, with Australia, with New Zealand. We're rolling over the European Union, 66 trade agreements that we have bilaterally. The India one is a big one. It's a very comprehensive agreement. And there are big issues. There are items, huge amounts of duty, 150% for Scotch whisky, 100% for cars. There are the issues of movement of people, of workers from India working in the UK, and issues related to that. So it's not easy, but most of the negotiations have been done. There have been 14 rounds of negotiation. So it's very close to being agreed. And I think now where there's a will, hopefully with a new government here in the UK, and after the Indian elections, that we will be able to complete this free trade agreement at the earliest, because it will bring great benefit to both countries.
If Labour wins the upcoming election, do you think, Karan, they will be able to finalise the FTA with India swiftly, given their commitment to finish the job?
Yes, absolutely. And this ties back to what is going to be important is, will Labour win with a convincing majority? Tony Blair, when he won in 1997, won by a majority of 170 seats. That gave him a huge majority to be able to implement the changes that he wanted to bring in to his party, to the country. And he did that very effectively because he had that big majority. Boris Johnson had an 80-seat majority, which he completely squandered away. Here it's a question of Labour getting a big majority, which will get them in a position to make the difference, including with something like the FTA. And it gives other countries the confidence that they have a government they can deal with, that is a stable government that's there to stay.
Right. So, what do you see as the main challenges and opportunities concluding the FTA between India and UK? How significant do you think are issues like market access for skilled professionals and import duties on goods, etc.?
Very important. Movement of people is extremely important. And this is where I think that this current Conservative government, with their hostile approach to immigration, has been very damaging. I'll give you an example. The net migration figures have been reaching 700,000. For a country of 68 million people, that's a very high net migration figure. And one of the reasons for that is, of course, the government continues to include international students within the net migration figures, of which Indians make up a big part of it. And because the number of Indian students and international students has been growing since the reintroduction of the post-graduation work visa since 2021, the hundreds of thousands of students that are in the net migration figures completely distorts that net migration figure and makes it very frightening. And the government refuses to listen. I've got cross-party support in the House of Lords saying exclude international students from the net migration figures when you present them. Other countries like America and Australia and Canada do that. The government refuses to listen to that and continues to scare people by including international students in the net migration figure. The genuine migration the country needs, of course we should. Genuine asylum seekers like we've had from Ukraine, asylum seekers we've had from Afghanistan, we've had people from Hong Kong, workers on the points-based system of which the Indians are the largest. Absolutely, we want people like that. There are labor shortages in every sector that we have. Agricultural workers, we have shortages as well. We need, those jobs need to be filled, and you need an immigration system that will work for that. But with a hostile approach to immigration, you can't achieve it. And I hope Labour will change that approach to a much more warmer, welcoming approach to immigration. And of course, the illegal immigration, the sad boats that come across the channel must be stopped, but not by sending people to Rwanda. I mean, that is an inhuman way of doing it, an impractical way of doing it. It's cost hundreds of millions of pounds. And people don't think that is the right way of doing it. But this Conservative government, a former Home Secretary, was dreaming of putting people on planes to Rwanda. I mean, that is not the attitude to have.
So, considering the UK's Indo-Pacific pivot and its fiscal constraints, how do you foresee the UK balancing its foreign policy priorities, including relations with the EU, Ukraine, Gaza and India?
The UK is not a superpower, but it is still the sixth largest economy in the world. It is still very much a global power, and it is still on the top table of the world. The UK is at the top table of the world, whether it's permanent seat in the UN Security Council, which, by the way, India should have a permanent seat. It's long, long overdue. Whether the UK is a member of the G7, whether the UK is a member of the G20, whether the UK is the second biggest power in NATO, whether it's the Five Eyes, whether it's AUKUS. I mean, the UK has got phenomenal, now the CTPPP, the UK has joined as well. So the UK has great alliances. What I think is the UK should have another alliance, and that is to join the Quad Security Alliance, which India is a part of, along with Australia, Japan, and the United States of America. That should be Quad Plus, including the UK, which would then encircle the world. So I think the UK and India need to get much closer when it comes to security and defense, whether it's defense manufacturing, whether it's joint training exercises, whether it's exchange of officers, which happens, but we can do a lot more of it. I think the UK and India need to be very, very close allies in defense and in security, closer and closer as time goes on.
The Conservative Party has proposed reintroducing a form of national service, right? So what are your views on this proposal? Do you see it being successfully implemented? Also because it costs like around £2.5 billion annually.
Well, a national service scheme is always a very good thing to have, and if you can afford it, and if it's done in the proper way. This was just sprung on everyone, and people see it as a sort of gimmick that's been announced. I mean, I think it's a wonderful idea to give young people the opportunity to serve in the armed forces, to volunteer, and this is a great initiative in that sense. But let's get back to reality. I spoke in the debate in 2019 in the House of Lords on the 70th anniversary of NATO, And in that debate,
Yeah.
I said the UK should not be spending 2%, which is the minimum defense spending, 2% of GDP on defense, which NATO requires. In 2019, 5 years ago, I said we need to spend 3%. And look at what has happened since 2019. We've had the Ukraine war. We've had all the instability around the world. We've got the situation in the Middle East. We've got all the issues of possibilities of what might happen with China and Taiwan. We've got what's happening with Iran. There is huge insecurity, and more than ever, we need to spend 3% of GDP. And what does Rishi Sunak and his government say? Oh, we will spend 2.5% under great duress when we can, if we can. No, we need to spend 3% now. In fact, there's an argument we need to go back to the Cold War levels and spend 4% of GDP on defense, because defense of a country and the security of its citizens is the most important duty of any government. And I think we're going to have to spend much more on defense. And we've got a great defense force, but it's too small. Our army in the UK is only 72,000. That is the smallest it's been since the Battle of Waterloo in the war between the Duke of Wellington and Napoleon. You know, we need an army of critical mass. My father was, I'm proud to say, Commander-in-Chief of the Central Army in India. He had 350,000 troops under his command. The Indian Army is an army of great strength and has that critical mass. The British Army is fantastically respected. Our armed forces, our Air Force, our Navy, our nuclear deterrent, our submarines around the world. We are a very powerful armed force, but we need to invest more. And this is where we can partner with India, whether it's in defense manufacturing and technology, and also joint exercises and exchanges of troops and officers.
So, with the possibility of a new government, what do you think will be the immediate international repercussions, particularly concerning the UK's role in NATO and the stance on the Russia-Ukraine conflict?
Well, the UK has been very clear. The UK and NATO have been extremely clear about NATO. I mean, and the wonderful news, and I think that one of the biggest mistakes that Putin has made in this horrible, horrible act he has done in invading Ukraine. It's now over 2 years ago, and the war continues, and the sadness of the deaths and the injuries and casualties every single day. That war has got to stop. But the biggest mistake he's made is Sweden and Finland have now joined NATO. These are two very powerful military countries. And Finland has a 1,400-kilometer border with Russia. And Finland can mobilize hundreds of thousands of troops within weeks. And Finland and Sweden in technology of whether it's artillery equipment, whether it's fighter aircraft, whether it's rifles, armaments, they are world-class, both Sweden and Finland. So Russia's made a huge mistake. It's actually brought in 2 new NATO members. It's going to make it much worse for Russia. And remember, NATO is a defensive alliance. It's not an aggressive alliance. NATO is there where an attack on one NATO country, even a tiny NATO country in the Baltics on the border with Russia, an attack on one country is an attack on all. And Article 5 is imposed, and the whole of NATO, you have the might of America and the United Kingdom and the best armed forces in the world against you, who will defend. As we've shown, the only time Article 5 has been implemented is after September the 11th, after 9/11.
Thank you, Karan. Thank you for agreeing to do this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you for watching us, guys. Have a nice rest of the day.